Hello YouTube. This is part 2 of my automating workbook pools in VBA. I wanted to show you the next step, which I think is, now that we know how to loop through all the workbooks, we need to pull the data from each workbook and put it in the summary workbook. And so I'm going to show you a simple technique. We're not going to use arrays. So if you have thousands and thousands of rows of data, then would not do it this way. I would do it with an array, and maybe I can do a future video on that, but it will be orders of magnitude faster. So we're just going to use ranges, and I think it'll be just fine. But for the purpose of today, I have I've populated those 3 workbooks with different data. One important piece is that it does have the same format, and so we're not going to get fancy with that on this video, but the same different format, just different data. It's in different orders and things like that. So Tom, Jake, John, Tom, different timestamps. So let's get into it. So I'm going to close these. And then in my main workbook, I've got a summary tab and I have a data tab. And I want to bring the data here and populate everything down below. So I'm going to clear the data here and then populate it with the new data, and then eventually we will do a summary over on this tab. So let's get started. Alt F11 to bring up the VBA editor. This is the code we had last time, and the only thing I think we need to do first is add a couple of variables for the workbook and the worksheet that we're in. So I'm just going to say here, because we're pulling open these workbooks, but I want a variable so that I can reference when I'm creating ranges. So I'm going to say here, we're going to say workbook or dim workbook current as workbook, and then I'm going to say dim worksheet current as worksheet. So when we do this is where we close it, and this is where we open it. So I'm going to say here, I'm going to say workbook current equals this. Let's see here. Let's put this in parentheses. There we go. Fix that problem. Next, I need to assign it to a worksheet. Now, I only have one worksheet in each of those workbooks, so I'm just going to use the index. But if you have multiple, hopefully they'll have a sheet name, or you may have to get more complicated by looping through until you can find something that matches the format you're expecting. But in my case, I can just say worksheet current equals workbook current, and then dot worksheets index is going to be 1. And so now let's run this just to see how this is working. So if we say debug.print, and let's just say worksheet current dot name, I think that should work. Okay, so if you remember, I'm going to hit F5 to run it. I'm going to pick the workbook, or the folder that contains all the worksheets. Okay, didn't like it. Oh, we forgot set. Because we're assigning an object, we need to say set. Always forget that. Okay, sheet 1, sheet 1, sheet 1. Perfect. And actually, let's do this. Let's say we want to print the workbook current dot name, and then join that like this. Let's try that. So we should get the workbook name. Nope, what did I mess up here? Workbook current dot name. Oh, another ampersand, like that. Okay, I think that's all working. And now let's run this again. Pick the workbook folder. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. So it looks like it's working. Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, all with Sheet 1. Great. Okay, now let's pull open a book to see what our data tells us. So I'm going to use my favorite method of pulling data from ranges is using the current region. I don't like finding the last row and going up and all those other ones. The only problem with current region is if you have something here, anything next to your block of data will make the range not work. So if you hit Control A, you can see that now my range is not here where I want it to be. And so I like to just delete column 3 and or row 3 in column A to make sure that nothing is where it's not supposed to be. So, but our range is going to be B4. So let's I don't need to save it. So if we go Alt F11 again, now let's do another variable and call it dim range current as range. Perfect. And let's grab a couple more things. I as long and J as long. I like to use I and J as kind of basically just digits to iterate through as my is it my iterables? I can't remember the exact term, but and I'm gonna put this in one line. Just take up a little less space, and let's do these here as well. Save a little space. Okay, so then we don't need the print anymore. Let's say set range current equal to, we're going to do it of the current worksheet. So let's say current worksheet dot range, and it's going to range B4 dot current region. Perfect. That should work, but first I'm going to say worksheet. I'm going to delete those offsets just to make sure there's nothing where it's not supposed to be. You may not need this. I don't like doing a lot of protection in these kind of training videos because I think it overcomplicates things, but this is pretty simple. So we'll say dot range, and we'll say first we're going to delete A to A dot what is it? Clear contents. That's what I want. And then also range 3 to 3 clear contents. And that is just to make sure the current region works properly. And then once we have this, this will be pretty straightforward because now what the first thing, now that we have all the data, you can see, here, I'll just print it out. Well, let me just say there's multiple ways you could do this. You could certainly copy each one and then paste them over. Like I said at the beginning, if you wanted to make sure, if you have thousands of rows of data, you would want to use an array and then paste it back to the sheet. But for this simple exercise, I'm going to say I'm going to use iterate just through the rows and through the columns. And let's do one thing first. I need to get the headers to come across. I want to say if it's the first time through the loop, go all the way, include the headers, and then the next time through, don't. So I'm going to say here, I'm going to say dim loop counter as long. And then I'm going to say, outside of the loop, I'm going to initialize that variable. So I'm going to call loop counter equals 0. And then we'll say here that loop counter equals loop counter plus 1. And then when we get down here, we're going to say if loop counter equals 1, then else, and if. And then if it does equal 1, next, so this is where we have the range specified. We basically have all that data stored in this variable. And now we just need to transfer it to this worksheet. And so for this exercise, I want to put it here, starting in B4 and go all the way down. And so let's do that. We'll need to clear everything first so that it's clean every time we run this, but we can do that at the end. So if it's 1, then we want to say for I equals 1. So we're using 1 because we want to include the headers. 2 range current dot rows dot count next I. Then we need to say inside of this loop, so that will give us all of the rows. But next I want to get all of the columns. So we'll say here for j equals 1 2 range current columns dot count, and then we'll say next j. Perfect. So we're doing a loop to go through the rows and a loop to go through the columns. May seem a little overcomplicated, and it probably is, but this is a very, very common methodology that you can use for arrays and all sorts of things. So I think the principle here is very applicable to other things. So bear with me. So now we just need to apply it to our sheet over here. So I have two sheets on this page. I have sheet 1 and sheet 2 called data. One of my favorite things to do to reference sheets in the workbook you're currently programming in is to go ahead and change the name here. So I like to specify it with sheet first. I'm going to say sheet data, and then I'm going to say here sheet summary. Then what we're doing here is we're saying sheet data equals dot cells, and then it's going to be I, and actually we do need a couple other variables because we need an I and a J basically for our current workbook. So we'll say dim I data, let's just call this row, and I row, I call as long, I call as long. Okay, so we're going to use those to reference where we are in the actual data sheet that we're bringing the data to. So that's going to reference where we are in this data worksheet as we bring all the data from the different worksheets over. So we need to initialize it at row equals 4, column equals 2. So let's set that here. So we'll say loop counter. So we'll say I row equals 4 and I call equals 2. Then we can say here I row, comma, I call. Dot values is going to equal the range current cells I, comma, j. Perfect. Okay, then so that's going to go all the way through, and then every time we get to a new row, we also need to initialize the j variable or the column variable. So we'll say here I column equals 2. The same thing we did here. And okay, so then this is if our loop counter is not equal to 1. And we added it there. So if it's not equal to 1, we're going to have the same loop here, but we're going to say for I equals 2 to range dot rows dot count, because here we don't want the header row to be included. We just want the data because we already got the header row when the first time through. So start with I equals 1 because we want to include header row. Perfect. Okay. So I think we are good. Then let's see how we are looking. Okay, the only thing I see that we need to do is we need to increment when we have a new. So every time we go to a new column, we need to say I column. Oh, I should have called that J column. Let's do that. J column and J column, J column, J column, J column. Okay, and then what we need to do here is we need to say J column equals J column plus 1, so that each time through it moves one column over, because the target data is moving one over, so we want to make sure this one moves over too. And then same with the row, we need to say I row equals I row plus 1. Same here. So I row equals I row plus 1. And then we will do this as J call equals J call plus 1. And we initialized it there. So I think that should work. So let's test this out. Whoops. J column. So if we loop through the workbooks, there we go. So that's all the data. The next thing we need, so we have everything working. So we're doing those loops. If it's the first time through, we're grabbing the header row. If it's not, then we are grabbing just the data. That makes it look a little more complicated because there's a little bit of code to do that. Then the next thing I would do is, before we run this, I would go up to the top and say, on this workbook, I would clear everything out so we don't have anything left. So I would say sheet summary or sheet data dot cells dot clear contents, and that would completely delete everything here. So if you walk through that code, boom, awesome. Then when we run through, click the workbooks page, we have all the data again. So hope that video was helpful. Certainly some easier ways to do it, but I think it was worthwhile to show how you would do it by iterating through the columns and the rows. I think another good approach would be to copy just the data over, copy the headers, and then copy the data, and instead of looping through rows and columns. But some really good techniques here. And on the next one, we're going to summarize this data and maybe with using some dictionaries, or at the very least maybe some charts, but learn how to work with some different objects and data structures. So hope you enjoyed it. Comment and please comment and ask any questions you have, and I'll try to get those answered. Hope this was helpful. Thanks. Bye.